The icy wind whistled through the bare larch branches, piercing even the thick sheepskin coat. April in the Siberian taiga was still winter, stubborn and unwilling to give up its hold. The snow lay in a dense, heavy blanket, with only a few dark patches of thaw near the edge of the river, covered with a fragile crust of morning ice. Ivan walked along the bank, routinely checking the traps he had set for fur-bearing animals. The air was clean and transparent, and the silence was such that he could hear the ice creaking under its own weight somewhere in the middle of the river. He had nearly finished his rounds, only one last trap remained, hidden near an old snag. That's when a strange sound struck his ears, not a growl or a howl, but a hoarse, gurgling roar, full of despair and pain. Ivan froze, his hand instinctively resting on the handle of his hunting knife at his belt, his heart pounding faster. The sound came again, closer and more clearly. Cautiously, trying not to make a sound, he moved toward the noise, his old but reliable rifle at the ready. What he saw through the thick willow thickets made him freeze in place. A young brown bear, no more than 2 years old, was frozen chest-deep in icy water near the bank. Apparently, he had tried to cross the river over thin ice, fallen through, and was now trapped in a deadly snare. The ice around him was stained with brown patches of blood, sharp edges had cut the bear's paws. The thick, once glossy fur was now clumped into icicles and covered with a frozen crust. His head drooped helplessly, puffs of steam escaping from his mouth along with ragged, hoarse breathing. Around him, silent witnesses to his desperate struggle, broken shrub branches on the bank, churned up snow, and more bloody traces. The bear barely moved now, only occasionally twitching convulsively as he tried to free himself, but his strength was clearly fading. His small, nearly black bead-like eyes were half closed, there was no rage in them, only deadly fatigue and hopelessness. Ivan, an experienced hunter who had seen many things in the taiga, felt a chill run down his spine. The animal was doomed. A few more hours and the icy water would finish him. Before we continue, let us know which city you're from, we're always curious where our viewers watch from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It gives us the motivation to create more new and interesting videos. Now, back to the story. Ivan stood motionless, weighing the situation. To walk away and let the animal die, albeit a painful death, was the law of the taiga, the weak perish. But something inside him rebelled against that simple, brutal rule. He didn't see a fierce predator, the master of the forest, but a young, helpless creature clinging desperately to life. How long he stood there staring at the fading bear, he didn't know. His thoughts were in disarray. Help him, but how? Getting close would be madness. Even a weakened, injured bear could break a human's spine with a single paw swipe. And if he started chopping at the ice, the noise and vibration might enrage the beast. The risk was enormous. He remembered the old hunters' stories about bears, their unpredictability, their strength and cunning. He remembered his own encounters with these taiga lords, always at a distance, always with a rifle at the ready. But now, in front of him was not an enemy, but a victim of circumstance, just another part of this harsh nature, like himself. The decision came suddenly, firm and final. He couldn't leave him here. It would go against his conscience, against something deeply human. He had to try. Dangerous, foolish, but he had to. Ivan slowly stepped back, trying not to make a sound. He needed a plan. First, distract the bear's attention. Second, act quickly and decisively before the bear regained strength or noticed the human's approach. He had a small but sturdy axe and some leftover venison he'd used as bait for the traps. That could work. His heart pounded in his throat, adrenaline buzzing in his temples. He knew how absurd this was, but it was too late to turn back. He had already made his choice. Glancing at the bear again, he heard a quiet moan escape the animal's mouth, and that sound finally solidified his resolve. He would return. He would try. Ivan went back to his snowmobile parked half a kilometer from the river, removed a frozen chunk of venison. About 10 kilograms, meat and bone, heavy and awkward, but the best bait he could offer. Back at the scene, he approached the river from the windward side so the scent of meat would reach the bear. The animal weakly sniffed the air, his nostrils fluttered. Ivan chose a spot 10 meters from the bear and hurled the venison with force. It landed with a dull thud on the ice, leaving a bloody smear. The bear stirred, lifted his head, and focused his gaze on the unexpected gift. He let out a low growl, more questioning than threatening. That moment was all Ivan needed. Quickly but as quietly as possible on the crunchy snow crust, he circled the bear from the side, out of his line of sight. He chose a spot where the ice looked thinner and raised the axe. The first blow shattered the taiga's silence. The bear twitched and turned his head, but the smell of fresh meat and his own weakness kept him focused on the venison. Ivan chopped rapidly and methodically, avoiding wide swings. The ice resisted, cracking into shards that flew in all directions. Cold spray hit his hands and face, but he ignored it. The goal was to free the animal as quickly as possible. He felt the strain in every muscle, sweat trickled down his back despite the frost. He could hear the bear's heavy breathing, smell his musky scent mixed with blood and river water. Every minute felt like an eternity. He chopped, piece by piece, expanding the hole around the animal's body. The ice was thick, at least 20 centimeters. The work demanded immense effort and extreme caution. After 20 minutes of grueling labor, his arms ached with fatigue, his breath was ragged. Finally, he broke off the last large chunk of ice trapping the bear. The water around the animal rippled. The bear made a feeble attempt to climb onto the ice, but his frostbitten, bleeding front paws gave no support. He sank again into the water up to his neck, with only his head remaining above the surface. Ivan stepped back a few paces, catching his breath, the axe heavy in his hand. He expected the freed bear to scramble for shore and disappear into the woods, or worse, attack him. But the bear didn't move. He lay in the freezing water, breathing heavily, and looked at Ivan with dull, nearly lifeless eyes. There was no aggression, no fear, only endless exhaustion. It was clear he wouldn't get out on his own. Leaving him here now would only delay the inevitable. He'd freeze or drown from weakness. Ivan faced another choice. The job was only half done. Now he had to pull the heavy body out of the water, and then figure out what to do next. He couldn't abandon him now. That would be a betrayal of himself, and of the impulse that had made him risk everything. He approached cautiously. The bear didn't move, only let out a low growl when Ivan was right beside him. "Easy, easy, buddy," Ivan muttered, not even sure why he was speaking aloud. "We're going to get you out." He estimated the bear's weight, no less than 70 kilograms. Hauling him onto the slippery ice alone would not be easy. He needed a way to do it without hurting himself or the bear. Looking around for a thick branch or log to use as a lever, he found nothing. He'd have to manage differently. Returning to the snowmobile, he retrieved a piece of strong canvas and a rope, always part of his gear. That might help. He spread the canvas on the ice right at the water's edge beside the bear. Then, summoning his courage, he approached the animal. The bear still lay motionless in the water, shivering occasionally from the cold. Ivan carefully slipped the rope under the bear's front paws, trying not to touch the wounds. The bear growled faintly but didn't resist. Making a loop, Ivan began to pull slowly. The heavy, limp body reluctantly shifted forward. It was hard, his feet slipped on the ice, his muscles burned. Step by step, centimeter by centimeter, he dragged the bear out of the freezing water and onto the canvas. At last, the animal lay fully on the ice, wet, trembling, completely exhausted. He curled up and whimpered softly. Ivan quickly inspected the wounds, deep cuts on the paws, still bleeding. The fur around them was matted with blood and ice. He had to treat them quickly and warm the animal. The decision came instantly: bring him to the cabin. It was warm there was a first aid kit, and a chance to care for him. Another insane decision in a day full of them, but he saw no other way. Carefully, he wrapped the bear in the canvas like a cocoon, leaving only the snout exposed so he could breathe. Then, with great effort, he hoisted the heavy bundle onto the snowmobile's cargo rack and tied it tightly with ropes. The journey would be long, about 10 kilometers to his winter cabin. The snowmobile roared to life, and Ivan he set off on his journey, constantly looking back at his unusual cargo. The bear lay motionless, only occasionally trembling. Ahead lay uncertainty, but Ivan felt he was doing the right thing. He was bringing a rescued life home, breaking all the laws of the taiga and common sense. The journey to the cabin felt like an eternity. The snowmobile roared as it sliced through the dense crust, leaving a deep trail behind. Ivan drove carefully, avoiding sharp turns and bumps so as not to disturb his unusual passenger. The bear lay quietly on the luggage rack, wrapped in a tarp, his labored breathing audible only now and then. At last, the familiar roof of the cabin appeared ahead, buried in snow up to the windows. No smoke came from the chimney. Ivan had left early in the morning. He pulled up to the shed, which stood a little apart from the cabin, and turned off the engine. Silence fell, broken only by his own heavy breathing and the bear's weak wheezing. Unloading the bear was even harder than getting him in. He was heavy and unwieldy. Ivan, straining with effort, managed to drag the tarpaulin bundle onto the snow by the shed door. The shed was small but spacious enough to house the bear. Inside, it smelled of hay and old wood. Ivan quickly cleared a corner, piled in dry hay to make a makeshift bedding, and carefully unwrapped the tarp. The bear lay on his side, eyes closed, shaking with powerful, exhausting tremors. Ivan rushed into the cabin and brought back his hunting first aid kit, an old, battered pouch packed with essentials, bandages, iodine, peroxide, ointments, and even some antibiotic vials left from when he had injured his leg. He poured warm water from a bowl and began carefully washing the bear's wounds. The bear flinched when the water touched his torn skin but showed no aggression. Ivan worked with utmost care, cleaning the cuts, removing ice and dirt, then applying antiseptic ointment generously and bandaging the paws with clean gauze. The bear remained still the entire time, occasionally opening his eyes and looking at Ivan with an unreadable expression: fear, surprise, or maybe just apathy. After finishing the bandages, Ivan covered the bear with more hay and an old fur coat to keep him warm. He placed a bowl of clean water nearby and stepped out, shutting the shed door tightly behind him. The first night of their unusual coexistence began. The first week of rehabilitation was the hardest. Ivan barely slept, constantly listening for sounds from the shed. The bear was very weak at first, barely moving and sleeping a lot. Ivan changed his dressings twice a day and treated his wounds. The process was stressful for both of them. Ivan worked slowly, making no sudden moves, speaking softly to the animal like one would soothe a frightened child. He had mentally named the bear Kosolap, pigeon-toed, because of the way he dragged his injured paw. At first, Kosolap would tense up and growl quietly when Ivan entered, but gradually he began to get used to him. He saw that the man wasn't causing pain but bringing relief. The biggest challenge was food. The bear needed high-calorie nutrition to regain his strength. Ivan began fishing in a nearby unfrozen stream, grayling, lennik, anything he could catch. Every day, he brought Kosolap at least 5 kilograms of fresh fish. At first, the bear ate reluctantly, but soon his appetite returned. He devoured the food eagerly, finishing his daily ration quickly. Ivan watched through a crack in the shed door. It was strange and a little eerie to see a wild animal so close, depending entirely on him. He knew it was a temporary arrangement. Once the bear was strong enough, he'd have to return him to the taiga. But for now, he was his patient, his responsibility. Gradually, Kosolap began recognizing Ivan. When he approached the shed, the bear no longer growled threateningly but only grumbled softly as if in greeting. He allowed the bandages to be changed almost without resistance, only occasionally snorting in protest when ointment touched a particularly sore spot. Ivan noticed that one of the front paws was healing slower than the others. The damage was probably deeper. There would likely be a scar, and the bear would limp slightly. Days passed, and Ivan resumed his usual routines, checking traps, chopping wood, cooking meals. But now his life revolved around the new inhabitant of the shed. He fished not just for himself but also for Kosolap, spending time on his care and constantly thinking about his condition. It was a strange, unfamiliar feeling, being responsible for a wild animal. By the second week, Kosolap had noticeably grown stronger. He no longer lay motionless but moved around the shed, limping on one paw. The wounds were healing, his fur was beginning to shine, and his appetite was excellent. Each morning began the same. As Ivan stoked the cabin stove, impatient scratching came from the shed door. Kosolap was demanding breakfast. Ivan would smirk to himself, so much for a wild animal. The bear had adapted to the routine. Ivan would bring the fish, open the shed door, and the bear would already be waiting at the threshold, shifting impatiently from paw to paw. He would take the fish gently, almost delicately, and retreat to his corner to eat peacefully. There was no longer any threat in his behavior, just natural caution and a trace of wildness, but no fear. He saw Ivan as a source of food and help. Sometimes, when Ivan changed his dressings, Kosolap would nuzzle his hand with a wet nose, as if examining him. Ivan would freeze, afraid to scare off this fragile trust. He knew it was dangerous to forget who stood before him, but something in this young beast stirred sympathy and compassion. He saw not just a predator but a living creature with character, fears, and perhaps even the capacity for gratitude. He began noticing details, how Kosolap liked to scratch his back against the log wall, how he snorted amusingly when annoyed, how attentively he followed Ivan's every move with those intelligent black eyes. A strange bond had formed between them, based on silent understanding and mutual respect. Ivan never tried to tame the bear, and Kosolap never showed aggression. They were unwilling roommates, bound by one event, the rescue on the icy river. By the end of the third week, Kosolap had nearly fully recovered. His fur gleamed, muscles filled out, and he moved confidently, though he still limped slightly. The scar was a lingering reminder. The shed was now too small for him. He paced from corner to corner, sometimes standing on his hind legs to scratch at the wall, as if trying to escape. Instincts were taking over. Ivan understood it was time. Keeping a wild animal any longer was not just dangerous, Kosolap was getting stronger and could become unpredictable. It was also wrong. His place was in the taiga, not a cramped shed. It was time to say goodbye. The decision wasn't easy. Over these 3 weeks, Ivan had grown attached to his unusual ward. The morning scratching at the door, the feeding, the bandage changes, these had all become part of his routine. Kosolap's presence had brightened his lonely life in the cabin. But he pushed these thoughts aside. He hadn't saved the bear to tame him, he'd given him a chance to survive in his natural element. Ivan began preparing for the farewell. He needed to choose a release site far from human settlements but rich enough in food. He remembered a stream about 40 kilometers from his cabin, teeming with fish, an ideal place. He also needed to plan transport. Kosolap was no longer a helpless bundle but a strong young animal. Ivan would have to build something like a cage on his snowmobile sled. In the last few days, Ivan watched Kosolap with a special sadness. He knew this strange chapter of his life was about to end. He tried to remember every detail, how the bear wrinkled his nose amusingly when eating fish, how attentively he listened to the sounds of the taiga outside, how sometimes he'd stare at Ivan with a long, studying gaze. The farewell promised to be hard, but it was necessary. The taiga was calling her child back. The day of parting arrived. In the morning, Ivan built a makeshift enclosure on his snowmobile sled using strong poles and rope. The construction was bulky but sturdy. Getting Kosolap inside turned out easier than expected. Ivan placed a few large fish inside, and the bear, hesitating only a moment, walked in on his own. Ivan quickly shut the door behind him. Kosolap grew restless, pacing back and forth, grumbling softly but not panicking. Ivan hitched the sled to the snowmobile, cast one last look at the now empty shed, and set off. The road was long and rough. The snowmobile struggled to haul the heavy sled over the slushy spring snow. Ivan drove slowly, constantly checking on his passenger. Kosolap would lie down, then get up again, peering through the bars at the trees rushing past. There was confusion and mild anxiety in his eyes. After several hours, they reached the chosen spot. The stream babbled cheerfully among melting snowbanks. The water was clear and transparent. Fresh animal tracks dotted the shore. The place was remote, wild, just what was needed. Ivan turned off the snowmobile. To the sound of water and the chirping of waking birds, he approached the cage. The bear stood pressed against the bars, looking at him. There was no longer any anxiety in his eyes, rather curiosity and expectation. Ivan opened the door. The bear didn't rush out. He stood for a while, as if saying goodbye or deciding something for himself. Then he slowly, cautiously stepped onto the snow. He took a few steps, shook himself off, looked around, inhaling the scents of the spring forest. Then he turned and looked at Ivan, a long, direct gaze. There was neither fear nor aggression in it, but something else, deep and indescribable. Ivan stood motionless, not taking his eyes off the bear. The bear stood for a few more seconds as if waiting for something, then turned and slowly walked toward the stream. His gait was almost steady now, only a slight limp on his right front paw reminded of recent misfortune. He approached the water, lowered his head, took a few sips, then raised his muzzle and looked at Ivan again. At that moment, the hunter felt he wasn't just looking at a wild animal, but at a sentient being, capable of feeling and remembering. Ivan slowly, trying not to scare off the moment, started the snowmobile. The engine roared, breaking the silence. The bear flinched, but didn't run. He remained standing by the stream, watching the snowmobile disappear. Ivan didn't look back, though his heart ached with a strange mix of sadness and relief. He had done what he was. That image remained in his memory for a long time. Returning to the cabin, Ivan felt empty. The silence was deafening after so many weeks of unusual companionship. The barn stood as a silent reproach. He cleared out the remaining hay and washed the floor, trying to erase the traces of the bear's stay, but memory could not be erased. He was once again alone with the taiga, with his familiar life as a solitary hunter. But something had subtly changed. The forest no longer seemed so hostile. Somewhere among the pines and firs roamed a beast that owed him its life. The thought warmed his soul. Days and weeks passed. Spring had fully arrived, the snow melted, the forest filled with birdsong and the smell of young foliage. Ivan continued his usual life but often thought of the bear, wondering how he was, whether he had survived, found a place in this vast world. Summer passed, the short Siberian autumn flew by in its crimson hues and early frosts, and winter came again, covering the taiga in a thick white blanket. Ivan's life returned to its winter rhythm, checking traps, hunting, chopping wood. Memories of the rescued bear became rarer, veiled in the mist of time. He had almost come to terms with the idea that he'd never know the bear's fate. About 8 months had passed since he released him by the stream. It was now December, and the frost was tightening its grip. One morning, stepping outside to gather snow for tea, Ivan noticed something dark right at the doorstep. Coming closer, he froze in surprise. On the trampled snow lay a large, still unfrozen fish, a burbot, weighing about 3 kilograms. There were no human footprints nearby, nor any signs of small predators that could have dragged it there. Only the snow was dotted with large tracks, bear tracks. Ivan went cold. Bears should be hibernating in winter. Wandering bears are dangerous, hungry, and have lost their fear of humans. He grabbed the rifle standing by the door and carefully looked around. It was quiet and empty. No one. He looked at the tracks again. They were clear and fresh. Then his gaze caught on one detail. One of the front paw prints was slightly blurred, less defined than the others, as if the animal had leaned on it differently. Ivan's heart skipped. He remembered the scar on the bear's paw, the slight limp. Could it be him? Had he come here, 40 kilometers? But why? And why leave a fish? Thoughts swirled in his mind, with no answer. He cautiously picked up the fish. It was fresh, freshly caught. A gift. Gratitude? Ivan smirked at his thoughts. A grateful bear, it sounded like a fairy tale. Most likely, it was just a coincidence. Maybe a wandering bear passed by and dropped the catch in fright. But the track, the distinctive track, kept bothering him. He took the fish into the cabin, but the feeling of unexplained wonder and a strange kind of joy stayed with him all day. Over the next few days, Ivan remained alert. He stepped out with his rifle, surveyed the area, listened to every rustle. But there was no sign of the bear. The tracks at the doorstep were soon covered by fresh snow, and the strange incident began to seem like a random anomaly. However, a week later, it happened again. Early in the morning, still dark, Ivan found another fish at the doorstep, this time a pair of large graylings. Again, the same tracks, with the same unique blur on the right front paw. Now there was no doubt, it was the bear. He wasn't sleeping. He was somewhere nearby. And he was bringing Ivan fish. Ivan stood in the frost, staring at the fish and the tracks in the snow, unsure what he felt: surprise, joy, anxiety. It all mixed together. Why wasn't the bear hibernating? Maybe the injury had kept him from gaining enough fat. Or he hadn't found a suitable den. And why did he come specifically to Ivan's cabin? Did he really remember? Was he really grateful? It seemed unbelievable, but the facts were stubborn. A wild bear, whom Ivan had saved almost a year ago, now regularly came to his house and left food. Ivan decided not to drive the unseen guest away. He didn't try to track him or catch a glimpse. He understood that the bear approached only when sure the man wasn't nearby or was asleep. Any attempt at contact could scare him and destroy this fragile, inexplicable connection. So he simply accepted these strange gifts. Sometimes it was fish, sometimes a hare or a capercaillie. He never knew when the next gift would come, but every morning as he stepped outside, he instinctively glanced at the doorstep. That's how the first winter of their new, silent companionship passed. The second winter after the bear's return arrived, and Ivan had grown used to his invisible neighbor. The strange gifts at the doorstep became part of his winter routine. As soon as the snow settled and the frost bit, familiar tracks would appear in the snow alongside fresh catch. Sometimes fish, sometimes small game. Ivan no longer wondered. He accepted it as a matter of course, like a secret pact between him and the rescued creature. He never saw the bear again after that day by the stream. The bear was cautious, only approaching under cover of night or twilight, leaving his offering and vanishing silently into the taiga. Ivan respected that caution and didn't try to cross the invisible boundary. Sometimes, sitting by the window with a mug of hot tea, staring at the snowy forest, he would think of the bear, how he was, why he wasn't sleeping, whether he had enough to eat to survive and still share. These thoughts stirred a mix of worry and a deep, quiet joy at this incredible connection. His life as a solitary hunter had taken on new meaning. He was not truly alone in the vast wilderness. He had a silent, grateful neighbor, even if it was a wild bear. He began noticing other signs of the bear's presence. Sometimes, while walking through his hunting grounds, he'd come across tracks off the usual paths, scat, or characteristic claw marks on trees. The animal clearly stayed nearby, within several kilometers of the cabin. But he never came too close, never created dangerous situations. It was as if he guarded the territory around the cabin. Whether it was the imagination of a lonely man or reality, Ivan didn't know, but he wanted to believe the latter. He wanted to believe that his act that day by the icy river had started a chain of events that led to this silent, wordless, yet strong and true friendship. The third winter was no different from the previous two. With the first hard frosts, fish and small game once again appeared at the doorstep. The familiar tracks with the scarred right paw led from the forest to the house and back. The bear was here. He remembered. He continued his strange mission. Ivan now took it for granted. He no longer asked why. He simply lived, knowing that somewhere nearby roamed his bear friend, who had somehow decided to watch over him. Sometimes, Ivan would leave something for the bear at the doorstep, a piece of dried meat or a bit of honey from the small apiary he maintained in summer. In the morning, the treat would be gone, and a new bear gift would appear nearby. It was their silent exchange, their way of communicating. He still never once saw the bear, and maybe that was for the best. The mystery remained, and the distance necessary for human-wild coexistence was preserved. But the knowledge that he was out there, somewhere, warmed Ivan's soul through the long winter evenings. The story of the rescued bear and his gratitude became something sacred to Ivan. He never told anyone about it. The few hunters who occasionally stopped by wouldn't have believed him. More likely, they would have laughed or called him crazy. But Ivan didn't need anyone's recognition. It was enough for him to know that beyond the walls of his warm cabin in the cold winter taiga, there was a creature that remembered kindness. He often recalled that April day, the icy river, the desperate roar. That day, he had made a choice guided by the heart, not reason. And now, 3 winters later, he saw the results of that choice, not just in the form of fish at his doorstep, but in the sense of harmony with this harsh yet beautiful world. The icy wind still whistled through the trees, the snow still blanketed the earth thickly, but the taiga no longer felt so lonely to Ivan. He had a friend, a silent, invisible, bear friend.